give me a hug, Rosanna, and you. Well, thank you, Rosanna. What we're going to do to start with, sometimes if you're a DEI leader, you get asked really difficult questions. We're going to come to those. But I'm going to start off with an easy one. Can you each take, a minute and a half, 2 minutes maybe, introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about you, the human, leading this work? Liliana, starting with you.
Thank you, Una. Hi, folks. I'm Liliana Blanco-Fernandez, she, her, ella, and a little bit about myself. So I was born in Spain, but I was raised in San Francisco. I was raised in the Mission District in San Francisco, and no one in my family had gone to college. I knew no one going to college. No one that I knew worked in tech, even though we lived in the Bay Area. But in my high school came a professor from San Francisco State. His name was Dr. Todd. May he rest in power. He came to my high school, and he created a cohort of us. And he said to us a couple things. He said, systematic racism and oppression is real. The only way to change the trajectory of your life is to get an education. And I'm going to ensure that all of you go to college. So I was not on my way to college, but I got to college. And he, in fact, did change the trajectory of my life. And he instilled in me, I think, what is my most important value. And he said to us, listen, I'm going to ensure that you go to college. But when you succeed, when you move up in the world, I need you to turn around, grab somebody else's hand, and bring them along with you. And so for 20 plus years, I was in the nonprofit space working on issues of social justice and equity and economic justice, and now I'm at Asana leading global belonging and inclusion.
Wow. Liliana, thank you so much. I might have to give you a little round of applause for that. I know. So Cornell, tell us about you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Cornell Verdeja-Woodson. I am the Director of Equity and Belonging at Zillow. And for me, I sit at the intersection of being Black and queer and being raised in a single-parent household. And the influence for me throughout life has really been my grandmother, who never had much, but always gave everything she had. And so for me, sort of seeing how she was able to navigate the world, make people feel like they mattered, it has always influenced what I always wanted to do. If you had asked me 10 years ago, would I be a DEI leader? I go, well, what is that, first of all? And no, that's not what I want to do. I wanted to be an OBGYN and cure cervical cancer and deliver big babies, right? Like, that's what I wanted to do. Organic chemistry did not see it that way. So I am here now. But what was always at the heart of what I wanted to do was making things better than what they were. My mother had a very terrible experience I'm the oldest of 5 children, and she had a very terrible experience with a nurse when she went in to have my sister, her 4th child, that made her feel like she didn't matter. And that was always the inspiration behind me and what I do and everything that I do, is how do we make this space better for the people who need it most, and so that is better for the folks who come after us.
Oh my goodness. Right. Rosanna, can you be that profound in 90 seconds?
I don't know that I can be that profound, but I'm Rosanna Duruthi, Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at LinkedIn. My pronouns are she, her, and ella as well. I'm the product of a Cuban dad who arrived here in the 1950s to begin a medical fellowship. He had $10 in his pocket and a Spanish-English dictionary, which might explain why the dictionary remains my favorite book. And my mom is from Puerto Rico. So I very much, as a child of this highly inspired Latino culture that came to this country to have a better life for themselves and their family, became a byproduct. My journey has been a little unorthodox, but much like Cornell and Liliana, an understanding of making things better. I went to college at 16, but before I was 17, I was already on leave of absence from college, and by 18, I was homeless for a couple of years. And while my career plan had been to be a lawyer, travel the world, retire early, those things didn't come to pass, but what did come to pass for me were the opportunity to embark on a profession I never thought of in human resources, to engage in this work of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Because while equity is critical in the work we do, belonging is the outcome that I want for every individual. And being Latina, being Black, being female, being lesbian, this journey of life has given me plenty of opportunity to understand that we are each different and we embody those differences differently. But if we can allow for our differences, what we create is the possibility of alchemy, to create something greater than what we are individually, to create something more special, where others can see themselves?
Oh my goodness. Well, I will say a couple of seconds about me. What can I say? I'm going to tell you about my privilege. I've got a ton of privilege, really, truly, because of my mother. I was brought up in a single-parent household, and, you know, as a mixed-race kid, or biracial in America, you might say, they all seem to arrive from everywhere, where, you know, like reading the news on TV, not in my childhood, not in my school. And so, you know, often called a mongrel in the playground and all that. However, this huge privilege I had was my mother just instilled this richness of self-belief. And I remember her crying one time watching TV. I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Oh, you wouldn't understand. It's just the politicians aren't doing their jobs properly." She was watching children starving on TV. And I didn't know what a politician was, but I thought, oh, I'll try and be a politician who does their job properly. And she then explained to me that, you know, it was run in the UK by the Prime Minister. And I remember saying to her, "Well, I'm going to be Prime Minister then." And her answer to me was, "Oh, really? You know, what, and are you going to do that before you're 30 or after you're 30? That was the question she gave me. And it's just, that is a privilege, honestly, that you cannot buy that privilege of having an adult putting that amount of faith and stability, even though, I mean, anyone who knows my mother might know that she was bipolar. From the outside, you might not have imagined if you heard the identity labels put on her. But that's why you got to go beyond the labels. Okay, well, after that interesting thought starter there, we are actually going to go into a difficult conversation, which is just acknowledging the unfolding catastrophe. I say unfolding, it has been unfolding for, you know, it's a multi-decade conflict. There's obviously been the most horrific events in Israel, in Palestine. And I just wonder, in your experience, do you have any words for leaders, managers, companies, in fact, all of us, about the practice of allyship and how you can show up and be a good ally when feelings are running so high for so many different communities? Rosanna.
You know, Una, I think you said something that really serves as a foundation for this conversation around allyship. Allyship is difficult, but when you have privilege, when you have the privilege of not being at the center of that conflict or having your people at the center of that conflict, what you have is the ability to stand alongside someone, check in on them, and speak to them. And I think there's a major truth about allyship that often isn't discussed because we're very celebratory about this context of allyship. And one should be celebratory. It's about giving and extending your privilege. It's about giving and extending support. It's about seeking to understand. But there's also something very true, and it's called being an ally is uncomfortable. Super uncomfortable. There are moments when you don't know what to say. There are moments when you don't have answers or solutions, and what you have to offer is just yourself, to be there for another, to be in the listening, to check in on someone, just to show that you care, not because you have the answers. And so allyship is a distinct capability that comes from privilege, the freedom to see what's possible for another, the freedom to listen to another, the freedom to grant your social capital on behalf of another.
Wow, granting social capital on behalf of another. You did have that dictionary a lot, didn't you? That's a great way of putting it. Cornell.
Yeah, I love what you just said. I think one of the things I would add too is that oftentimes when we want to be an ally or accomplice or an advocate, whatever word we're using, we oftentimes fall into the trap of further taking away people's agency. And so for me, allyship is not about I'm doing something for someone. I'm not a man coming to save women. I'm not a cisgender person coming to save trans people. I'm working in collaboration with a group that I may not be a part of. And so I think that's really, really, thank you. I think that's really, really critical, is that it's an opportunity to give power back to an individual or to a group of people to say, what does that look like for you? What do I need to do in this moment that will actually help and solve the problem that you're facing right now? And also being mindful of when to ask, what can I do too? Because when you're exhausted, it's like, I ain't got time to teach you right now, right? And so what are my other resources that I can utilize to find that information? Because what we do know for sure is that marginalized people have been writing, dancing, singing, and acting their stories for generations. And there's many resources to figure that out.
I love what you say, and I think it's an opportunity to reflect more widely on allyship. And this thing like, you feel, oh, maybe I'm in a majority group, maybe I'm in an underrepresented or under-resourced or minority group, whatever it may be. But I think what we have to understand is that we're usually, all of us, whatever our different backgrounds, whatever the, how intersectional those different backgrounds, at some points we are in the majority group and at some points we're not. And allyship is about understanding when you have that often unearned privilege. And I didn't really understand that until one time. Like I understood when I finally followed my mum's advice, and I didn't. Obviously, clearly, I did not become Prime Minister, but I did become a Member of Parliament just before the age of 30 at 29. And when I got there, so I was the second woman of colour in the UK Parliament, and it was very obvious to me that I was a minority group. Very, very obvious, right? You didn't need any sort of clever anything to understand that. What I did not realise was that I was a majority group and privileged as an able-bodied woman. I did not realize that. I was ignorant. And it actually took a disability group, asked me if I would spend some time in a wheelchair. And it was being in that wheelchair. I was like, yeah, sure. They were like, you care about disability? I was like, yeah, of course. And then I realized I couldn't even get into the office. I couldn't, I was barred in very obvious ways and then more subtle ways. There were so many layers to it. And it's that point, allyship is understanding. It starts with you reflecting on what did you get unearned that you just had without even really thinking about it, right? And it's the thinking about it.
And that doesn't take away from what you've accomplished, right? Acknowledging that life was just perhaps a little bit easier for me to get where I am doesn't take away that I worked hard. And it's like being able to balance both those narratives at the exact same time, I think is also really important.
Absolutely. Any more takers on this theme of allyship and...
I mean, I think it also doesn't take away that you might have also suffered to the point of intersectionality. And actually, I love this concept of power because I think that there's a myth around power, that power is a zero-sum game. And we think that if I have power and you become empowered, I have less power. And in fact, that's a fallacy. If I have power and you become empowered, now there is more power in this space.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, can we give Liana a round of applause? Okay, now from one easy question to the next. The Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action.
Oh, yay.
Oh, yay. How much fun. Let's see who can lose their job in the next 10 minutes.
I got a mortgage, Una. You can't.
I got my
don't
manager
do that.
right there, okay? We all know that in this climate, following the Supreme Court ban on affirmative action, even though that ban was for higher education and the law impacting companies has not changed at all, we see news headlines about companies scaling back their DEI efforts, left, right, and center. Our companies are not. That's why we're here. Aren't we lucky? But what I'd really love to ask you is, what words of wisdom do you have, either for people here or those, thousands of people watching online who want to continue doing DEI work, either during an economic downturn, when it's become much harder, especially in the tech industry, or just the fact that there's this chilling effect, an incredible chilling effect and there's just much more resistance now to DEI work. Has anyone got any words of wisdom on that? And Liliana, I think I'm going to come to you first.
Sure. Thank you, Una. So I think in the face of resistance, we need to mobilize our resources. Now more than ever, as DEI practitioners or champions, we have to mobilize our people resources, our financial resources, our strategic resources. We have to mobilize our power, our personal power, our organizational power, that power that comes from fighting for social justice. And when you mobilize those resources, you're able to get really clear on what it is that you're fighting for. And not only what it is that you're fighting for, but how exactly you're going to fight for what's right. And when you have that clarity, you're able to think deeply about the ways in which you can invest in programs that work towards equity. And at Asana, we recognize that systems of oppression are real, that it is our job to disrupt inequities. And so the way that we do that is by using data to strategically develop programs that drive at the heart of inequities. Because when we use data, we're able to have a very clear story about why we're doing something, how we're going to do it, what exactly we're going to do. And when we have that clarity, we're able to design and develop and scaffold the most impactful programs. And we recognize that it's not only the right thing to do when we have that data pointing to us exactly what it is that we should be doing, but we know that it's also going to create better business outcomes and help us achieve our mission.
Oh, we love that, don't we? We love that a lot. Cornell, what would you add?
I think for me, everything you just said, I think for me, it's also focusing on, this is an opportunity for us to be reminded of our why. And when I say why, more of a philosophical why. Why did we choose to engage in DEI work to begin with? Because it's in moments like this with economic downturn and external pressures to dismantle DEI efforts that it's very easy to go, you know what? This is too much. But when we remember our why and why this matters and who it actually matters for, which is really all of us, but particularly those who are most harmed by lack of inclusion efforts, we can hold on to the intrinsic motivation as to why we do what we do. So my research is sort of sits in what intrinsically motivates people to participate in the advancement of DEI. And every now and then we have an opportunity to come back to that as our grounding, as our foundation, to say, this is why we do this is why it matters. And then we add the data and we add all the other stuff that helps to justify why these things matter and why we must do them now.
Rosanna.
I think that why is really important. Working for LinkedIn, our why is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce, which really creates a foundation around this work of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, recognizing that while opportunity may be universal, access to economic opportunity isn't. And so our work foundationally requires a context where equity helps drive the outcomes. And it's important as practitioners that we have this ability to understand, to Liliana's point, this isn't a zero-sum game. Like, success breeds success. And often this conversation around diversity and inclusion has what I call false parameters. A perception that in order for one person to have opportunity, another person is losing out on opportunity. That premise has never been true, although it's very true that opportunities have been withheld from groups of people and individuals who have skills, abilities, capabilities. And in order for our world to work, in order for our companies to work, it's really critical that we have an understanding of how we are not allowing for, but inviting in great talent. And that means that we can't just settle for whoever's knocking on our door. We've learned that you can't be what you can't see. We've heard that from many people. So we have a responsibility and an obligation to ensure that people see themselves, whether it's in leadership or in software engineering, or in roles that historically haven't been represented by groups that have been marginalized. And those opportunities create quantum opportunities for the generations that follow. So I'm always inspired by that, but it's very clear that our why is more dynamic and truer than ever. And lastly, the one thing I'd say is, while much is made of the Supreme Court decision regarding academia, many of our companies still have this obligation with a little agency known as the OFCCP, the Office of Federal Contracts and Compliance Programs, which means we still have a responsibility to ensure that we are hiring diverse talent and that we're enabling our opportunities to be accessible to communities that have not had access. So it's not exactly as cut and dried as it might seem.
Yeah, and I love that point. All the points, and at some point we're going to come back to touching on the data point as well, really critical. And the fact that actually if you have a really well thought through hiring program based on data to make up the gaps where there is underrepresentation, then if you have that DEI program in place, you actually have greater legal safety if we're looking to avoid the risk. But I want to come back to this point you made, which essentially, Rosanna, what you were saying is, look, don't just do DEI because you want to tick the box and the OFCCP and all the rest of it. Do it because this is about greater excellence. Excellence from a diverse workforce. And I got to just say this one little story. Forgive me, you just reminded me of this. When I used to be Chief Diversity Officer for a UK broadcaster, some of you will know, Channel 4, and the head of Film 4 at that time said, oh my God, we've never in our history invested in a black film director, right? I mean, this is a while ago. Sorry, I should be very clear. This is a while ago. And so she said, I need you all to go out and find more talent, right? It's not that there can't be black people in Britain or Asian or of other colors, but specifically, they had invested in Asian, never invested in black. So she was like, go and find this talent. Her team goes away, they look for Asians, they come back after 6 months, they go, no, we couldn't. There's no one, right? And they, to be fair, they said there's no one of the caliber that we, Channel 4, would invest in as a director. And you know what she said? And I really love this. This was a white woman in a position of power. And she said, well, you know what? If you're telling me there isn't a black person who can be a director in Britain, then either you are looking in the wrong place or you're looking at the wrong talent pool. Be more imaginative. So they go out, and in the end, they go to a different talent pool. Instead of a director, they go to a visual artist. They find someone, they invest in him long-term over 5 years. And his fourth film won the Oscar for Best Film. His name was Steve McQueen. The film was 12 Years a Slave. That came out of someone in power saying, who's not in this room? Who do we not invest in? Don't tell me it's lowering the bar. Don't anyone tell me that is lowering the bar. Steve McQueen is widely acknowledged as one of the greatest filmmakers, but we weren't open. And we all have to be more imaginative, look harder, be cleverer, be more, don't stand there going, oh, we can't find them. Yeah, because that really gets on my nerves. Anyway, thank you. All right, guess what? I've now got an easy question. I have got an easy question, yes. And the easy question, I mean, it doesn't have an easy answer, and we still fail day in, day out. As I often say, it's amazing. We have the technology, yeah. We can put a man on the moon, but we can't hire women or people of color into our tech organizations at the rates that we should, right? So how are you all thinking about how you do that? How do you succeed in recruiting and hiring people from underrepresented groups in tech? Is there anything that's really worked for you that you'd like to share? We're all ears. Everyone's all ears.
I'm happy to jump in on that because I think much of it really is this idea that recruiting is you go into the market just when you have a need. But in reality, recruiting is about relationships. It's about the investments you're making in not just organizations and partners, but the investments you're making to build for the future. The partnerships that exist, I know at LinkedIn we have a number of partnerships that are immensely valuable because they are generating the talent of the future. They're bringing communities together. They're bringing people to opportunities. Organizations like Reboot Representation, Lesbians Who Tech. The idea really is how are you fostering and nurturing that potential? And then as you pointed out, it pays for organizations to be a little innovative in this area. We certainly embarked on something at LinkedIn some years back that we think has made a difference for our organization, and it was called Bridge. It was the idea that it's not that there's an absence of diverse talent in the marketplace. There's an absence of connections or networks that surface that talent. And we found ways to bring together the leaders of our organization with leaders from a variety of marginalized populations, just to get together, break bread over dinner, discuss matters that were germane to their field of practice, whether it was in marketing or in product or in talent. And what we found was these people who came together, often peers, they were, leaders in their organizations. They may have gone to the same schools and graduated the same year. They didn't know each other. They're in the same field of practice. They had never connected. And what emerged from that was not only the initial conversation, but the follow-through, the relationships that began to form, because you invite this person for lunch or coffee, and then you get to see they have a particular area of expertise, and you invite them to present at your next offsite for your team and share that expertise with your team. And lo and behold, as time passes, a year, 15 months, opportunities emerge, and these are individuals who become top of mind for great opportunities. And when they enter the organization, the big difference is they have a relationship now that supports, versus this idea that the only time you get known is when you're a candidate. Yet everyone else in that environment has a connection that's much deeper seated, whether it was going to school together or having worked in other companies together. And so this idea of relational recruiting requires a much longer term view.
Right.
It requires a willingness to invest in organizations and partners who are seeding opportunity, but also providing networks to talent, because ultimately your success is not going to be just based on the work you do. It's going to be based on the relationships that inspire you and influence you and share information with you and create the space for belonging so that you can succeed and thrive.
Yeah.
And I think, Liliana, your story of, was it Professor Todd? Rest in power.
Yeah.
He literally opened that door and those relationships. But fast forward now that you are this professional executive sitting on stage, what advice have you got for people trying to make their actual networks and their recruiting practices more successful in terms of diverse outcomes?
So for us, it moves a little bit beyond recruiting. And if you don't mind, I think I'm going to jump to the next question, which is really about retention.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Because I think you covered it. Unless, do you want to say anything about recruiting?
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is
Yes.
I think accountability is huge, right? I think the recruiter can do the recruiting and all that good stuff, and we can put the leaders in front of the talent. But if we're not holding people accountable to do the thing that we said we're going to do, which was to diversify our employee base, then none of it really matters.
But Cornell, wait a minute. How do you do that?
Yes.
Tell me about the accountability.
Oh, now you get into a whole nother. Do we have time for that level? Because I can go into the research on accountability
Go there.
I think, so one, I think accountability has to come from the top. And so if the leaders are saying that this matters and that there are actual benefits or rewards, if you will, but also, what do you call what's the opposite of rewards? Thank you. You call them sanctions. That are real, that were. I was a high school English teacher, and one of the first things they told us when we entered the classroom is that you have to have a reward and consequence system. And the first time you don't implement it, when something happens, you've lost your students. And I think grown adults are the exact same way. You can say at your all hands that, this matters, and if you don't do it, you won't get your bonus, you won't get the raise, you won't get that head count. But the minute you don't do it, they go, see, they don't care. And so that accountability really, really matters. When we have to understand what matters to the people who have the obligation to do the hiring, what makes them tick, what are they willing to not let go of if they don't do what we've asked them to do. And I think accountability gets a bad rap because it's seen as this bad thing, but we've been doing it for generations. It's called the prison industrial complex.
But
we know accountability.
But the other thing is, it's hilarious. Everyone's always accountable about everything else in a business.
That's
so then you want them to be accountable about
the
DI,
minute
and
that
they have a
salesperson
breakdown.
doesn't meet their quota, they're out. They
know.
want a PIP. But when it comes to diversity, when it comes to hiring, for some reason we can't get it together, and we have to unpack that as well. Go ahead.
Love that. Okay, so you're going to talk about retention, and then each of you is going to give us something very hopeful for the future. So, Liliana.
And I love this because to the point of accountability, the ways in which we think about retention is we ask ourselves, in what way can Asana show up as an ally to our employees? And so when we think about retention, we think about two axes. We have like the traditional leadership development, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, talent management, manager enablement, et cetera. And there we have a program called Mission-Driven Leadership, which engenders an equity lens for leaders who want want to build and support their teams. But more interestingly, on the next axis, we have developed programs around dimensions of allyship. So we developed a sponsorship program where folks from URM communities and others get matched with a sponsor who's at least 2 levels above them, who can advocate for them in spaces in which they're not. And we know from research the impact that can have on changing someone's career trajectory. We also developed a mentorship program. So our ERGs launched a mentorship program, and we know the power of having someone in your corner who can give you that advice right when you need it. And we also created a program that allows folks to feel as though they have confidence, right? And so with The Crew, which is an organization that maybe you folks are familiar with, we launched peer coaching circles for our WTG and C Asanas, where they're able to coach each other around professional and personal goals, and they're able to be confident for each other in our organizational space.
Liliana, thank you so much for that. Our time here is drawing to a close. Just 30 seconds each on what gives you hope in these very difficult times. What in the DEI space gives you hope for the future? Cornell, I'm going to come to you first.
I think we're seeing more people awakening to the issues that exist. And so I think the idea around collective action is becoming more and more real. And so I'm hopeful that I'm not going to be alone because I'm tired.
Well, you're not. You're in the right place.
That's right.
Collective action. Liliana.
And mine is exactly the same. It's that I don't feel alone when I'm in community. This deep knowing that I'm part of a rich legacy of ancestors fighting for what's right, fighting for justice, and knowing that there's going to be many generations after me doing this important work allows me to harvest gratitude, center joy, and stay both buoyant and very hopeful.
Oh my goodness, harvest gratitude and center joy, everyone. Rosanna, last word to you.
Disruption creates ripe circumstances for opportunity. And I believe that there are so many of us who recognize that what will carry us into the future is not the practices of the past. And I'm very optimistic with the generation that's coming into the workforce with conversations like this that didn't exist in the past, that allows me to believe there's a conscience that there's more for us to create and seed in this world to allow others to succeed as well.
Well, thank you so much. Everyone, please join me in giving our panelists a huge round of applause. Thank you.